My name is Samantha Reed. I'm 29 years old. And the strange thing about the moment your future dies is that it almost never sounds dramatic when it begins. There's no music, no shattered glass, no perfect sentence hanging in the air like a warning. Sometimes, it starts with something as small as laughter in a quiet kitchen. I thought he would fight for me. I need you to sit with that for a second. Not just hear it, really understand it. I told the man I loved that I was pregnant, and that the baby might not be his. It might be his brother's. And I thought he would fight for me. Even now, saying it out loud makes something inside my chest tighten like it's trying to protect itself from the truth. Because that sentence, that belief, it wasn't just wrong. It was delusional in a way I didn't have the language for back then. But I lived inside that delusion for months. And the fact that I can sit here now and admit it, with shaking hands and a voice that still catches in my throat, means I've finally crawled far enough out of it to see it clearly. What I carried into that kitchen was the most entitled, self-destructive expectation a woman could bring into the worst moment of her life. His name was Ethan Davis. I'm not going to hide it behind something softer. He deserves to be real in this story. Ethan Davis, 32, an architect. Not the flashy kind. The kind who builds things that last. Quiet buildings, functional, thoughtful, places people actually live in. That was him too. Steady, reliable. The kind of man who doesn't need attention to exist. He just shows up, every day, without fail. He remembered everything. Doctor's appointments, the way I liked my coffee, the fact that I hated driving in the rain. He would fix things before I even noticed they were broken. Sometimes I used to joke that he paid more attention to the apartment than I did. What I didn't say, what I didn't understand, was that he paid that same quiet attention to me, all the time. I just didn't recognize it as love, because it didn't feel like chaos. We had been together for 4 years, living together for 2. And somewhere along the way, something inside me started to panic. Not visibly. Not in a way anyone else could see, but internally. A slow, creeping voice that whispered things I didn't question. If he's not chasing you, he's losing interest. If it feels calm, it's fading. If you're not the center of his world, you're being replaced. I didn't know it then, but that voice didn't come from Ethan. It came from my childhood. I grew up in a house where love wasn't given freely. It was earned. My mother gave affection, like it was a reward system. My father was there, physically, but emotionally he lived somewhere else entirely. So I learned early that love wasn't something you could trust. It was something you had to secure, maintain, fight for. And if it ever became quiet, that meant it was slipping away. Ethan's brother's name was Lucas, 2 years older, and everything Ethan wasn't. Where Ethan was quiet, Lucas was magnetic. Where Ethan observed, Lucas performed. He had this way of walking into a room and making it feel like the temperature changed. Like suddenly everything was more interesting, more alive, more focused on him. He complimented strangers, flirted effortlessly, made people feel seen, but in a way that wasn't steady. It was sharp, addictive, temporary. I saw all of it. I understood exactly what kind of man he was, and I walked straight toward him anyway. It started small. It always does. A message here, a joke that lingered just a little too long. Ethan's lucky. If he ever messes up, I'm right here. There was always a laughing emoji, just enough to make it deniable, just enough to keep the door cracked open. I should have shut it. I should have shown Ethan. I should have drawn a line so clear it couldn't be crossed. Instead, I smiled at my phone. I responded. I played along. And Lucas, who had spent his entire life walking through doors that weren't meant for him, walked right in. The texts turned into calls. The calls turned into coffee. Then lunch. Then drives that had no destination but lasted for hours. I told Ethan I was with friends. I told him I was running errands. I told him I had work things. And he believed me because he trusted me. Because the person I was lying about was his brother. And who suspects their own blood? That's the part people don't talk about. How easy it becomes. The first lie feels heavy. The 10th feels manageable. By the 20th, you're not even lying anymore. You're just living in a different version of reality. The first time it became physical was a Thursday. At Lucas's apartment. I remember parking 2 blocks away like I was doing something criminal. Which I was. I remember walking up the stairs, my heart pounding. Not from fear, from anticipation. And this is the part I hate admitting. But I need to be honest. I felt alive. Not because Lucas was better than Ethan. He wasn't. Not in any way that actually mattered. Ethan was kinder, deeper, loyal in a way that felt unshakable. But Ethan's love was calm. And Lucas's attention was chaos. And I was addicted to chaos. Because chaos felt like being chosen. The affair lasted 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of splitting myself into 2 people. The version of me who sat across from Ethan at dinner, laughing, talking, kissing him goodnight, and the version of me who, hours earlier, had been somewhere else entirely, doing things that would have destroyed him if he knew. And somehow, I kept them separate, so separate that sometimes I forgot. There were moments where Ethan and I would be cooking together, or walking through the park, and I would feel real love for him, genuine, warm, safe. And the affair would feel like something happening in another life, like it belonged to someone else. That was the lie I told myself, that it didn't count, that it didn't take anything away from what I had, as if betrayal comes in categories, as if love can survive being divided like that. The pregnancy happened because I got careless. That's the truth. I missed pills. I stopped paying attention, because maintaining two lives is exhausting. And eventually, something breaks. When I saw the test, my first reaction wasn't panic. It was denial, not of the pregnancy, of the truth. I told myself it could be Ethan's. I did the math over and over, Googled timelines, built entire scenarios in my head where everything stayed intact. But the math didn't bend for me. And deep down, I knew. I had options. So many options. I could have handled it quietly. I could have told Lucas and left Ethan out of it. I could have made a decision on my own, carried the weight alone. But I didn't. Because somewhere in my mind, twisted by years of misunderstanding love, I believed telling Ethan was the right thing. The honest thing. Like honesty could undo betrayal. Like truth delivered at the wrong time wasn't just another form of destruction. But the worst part, the part that still makes me feel sick, I didn't just think he would stay. I thought he would fight for me. It was a Tuesday, cold outside, warm inside. Ethan was in the kitchen, making pasta. He always made pasta on Tuesdays. Routine, steady, predictable in the way that used to comfort me. He was chopping garlic when I sat down. He looked at me and said, "You okay? You look pale." I said, "I need to tell you something." He stopped, put the knife down, wiped his hands, sat across from me, and gave me his full attention. The last time he would ever look at me like that, I said, "I'm pregnant." And for a moment, just a moment, his face lit up, pure joy, unfiltered. He stood up immediately, already moving toward me, reaching for me, ready to hold me. And then I kept talking. "I don't know if it's yours." He stopped, mid-step. His hands fell. Silence. "I've been seeing someone else." A pause. "Who?" he asked. One word. I said, "Lucas." Something in his face shut down. Not anger, not sadness, something deeper. Like the person I knew, the man who loved me, left before his body did. He didn't yell, didn't ask questions, didn't cry. He just stood there, still. Then he picked up his keys, walked to the door. I said, "Ethan, please, say something, yell at me, anything." He didn't turn around, didn't pause. He opened the door, stepped outside, and left. No slam, no goodbye, no second glance. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I called Ethan 23 times that night. I know the number because I counted it the next morning like it meant something. Like there was a threshold where 22 missed calls meant he was hurt, but 23 would prove he still cared enough to listen. Every call went to voicemail. I texted him paragraphs, then shorter messages, then frantic ones. "Please answer. Please just tell me where you are. I'm sorry. Please don't do this. Please." By midnight, I had sent enough words to fill a confession booth, a courtroom, a grave. None of them brought him back. I called Lucas too. Twice at first, then 6 times. Then until the screen blurred in my hand and I couldn't tell whether I was calling him because I needed answers or because I needed someone else to carry even a fraction of what I had just detonated. He didn't answer either. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, the chopped garlic still on the cutting board, the pot of water cooling on the stove, and cried until my ribs hurt. Not because I was suddenly noble. Not because remorse had purified me in some dramatic burst of self-awareness. I cried because I was terrified. Because for the first time in my life, I had pushed someone to the edge, and instead of fighting me, instead of pleading or screaming or trying to drag me back into the center of the storm I had created, he had simply stepped out of it. And I had no idea what to do with that. I had spent my whole life believing love was measured by reaction, by volume, by how loudly someone broke when you wounded them. If they yelled, it meant they cared. If they begged, it meant you mattered. If they stayed through betrayal, then the betrayal somehow became proof of the love. That is how sick my understanding was. Ethan gave me none of that. He gave me absence. And absence, I would learn, is sometimes more devastating than rage. The next day I went to work anyway. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember what I wore. I only remember checking my phone every 4 minutes like a woman waiting for a verdict. Nothing. No message. No missed call. No sign that the man I had lived with for 2 years still existed in any world I could reach. I left work early because I couldn't breathe right. When I got home, I opened the apartment door and knew immediately he had been there. Not because there was damage, not because he had left some theatrical sign of pain, because the place felt lighter, emptier. His shoes were gone from the hallway. His coats were gone from the closet. His laptop was gone from the desk. The books he kept stacked beside the bed, gone. The framed photo of his mother from the entry table, gone. His razor from the bathroom. His watch charger from the dresser. All the small private things that made a home his had been removed with surgical precision. He had not taken anything we bought together. Not the couch. Not the dishes. Not the lamp we argued over for 40 minutes because I thought it looked too industrial and he said that was the point. He took only what belonged to him. It was clean, measured, final. No note, no explanation. No trace of emotional chaos scattered around for me to interpret in a way that would keep me at the center. He did not leave a mess for me to clean up. He left clarity. That might have been the cruelest mercy of all. I stood in the bedroom doorway and stared at the half-empty closet until my knees gave out. That was when it started to become real. Not the confession. Not even the pregnancy. The loss. The shape of him missing from a room we had shared. The outline of a life retracting from around me. I slept there one more night. I don't know why. Maybe because I thought if I stayed in the apartment long enough, he might come back for something he forgot. Maybe because I was still trapped in the logic of movies, where men return in the rain with grief carved into their faces and demand an explanation they have already decided to forgive. But Ethan was not a movie man. He was a real man. And real men with self-respect do not come back to negotiate with ruin. Lucas finally answered on the third day. Not a call, a text. 3 words. Need space, sorry. I stared at the screen so long my vision doubled. Then I called him immediately. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I texted back, space? That's all you have to say? Nothing. I asked where he was. Nothing. I asked what we were supposed to do. Nothing. I asked if he was serious. Still nothing. That was the beginning of the second disappearance. Not the one that broke me. The one that humiliated me. Because Ethan's silence had dignity in it. Lucas's silence had cowardice. There is a difference, and I felt both. A week later, a mutual friend told me Lucas was talking about leaving town. Another week after that, he was gone. New city. New job. No forwarding address. Someone said there was already another woman. A woman he met online. A woman who, for all I know, was being fed the same practiced intensity that once made me mistake attention for love. I remember sitting in my car outside a grocery store when I heard that and laughing. Not because it was funny, because for one thin, splintering second, the whole delusion cracked open so completely I could see its bones. Lucas had never loved me. Not once. Not for 1 second. Whatever happened between us had never been rooted in care. It had been appetite, ego, competition. He wanted what belonged to Ethan. And when taking it stopped being thrilling and started becoming expensive, he walked away from it. From me. From the baby. From the fallout. From all of it. That was the man I had chosen chaos for. Not some misunderstood, passionate soul who saw me in a way Ethan didn't. Not some forbidden connection too intense for ordinary morality. Just a selfish man who enjoyed winning more than he valued people. I wish that realization made me wiser immediately. It didn't. It just made me ashamed. The apartment became unbearable after that. For the first 2 weeks, it still smelled faintly like Ethan's cologne and laundry soap. I couldn't bring myself to open the windows. It felt like opening the windows would mean admitting he was not coming back. So I lived in stale air and regret, walking from room to room like a trespasser in my own life. The pregnancy kept advancing whether I was emotionally equipped for it or not. Nausea, exhaustion, the constant disorienting awareness that my body was moving toward a future I had no plan for. I considered every option. Termination. Adoption. Keeping the baby. I researched clinics. I read forums at 2 in the morning. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a women's health center for 45 minutes, with the engine off and my hand on the door handle, and never went inside. People like to imagine choices happen in clean lines. You decide. You act. You live with it. That is not what it felt like. It felt like drowning in my own unreliability. Every major decision I had made for nearly a year had been poisoned by self-deception. I no longer trusted my instincts enough to let them guide anything as irreversible as motherhood or ending a pregnancy. So I stalled. And in stalling, I chose time. And time chose for me. I called my mother before I told anyone else in my family. I should explain something about my mother. She was never cruel in the dramatic way people understand cruelty. She did not scream. She did not throw things. She did not humiliate you in public. Her cruelty, when it appeared, wore the respectable clothes of practicality. I told her I was pregnant. She inhaled sharply and said, "Well, a baby is a blessing." I almost laughed at the simplicity of that sentence. A baby is a blessing. As if blessings arrive detached from context. As if a child conceived in betrayal becomes uncomplicated just because it is innocent. Then I told her the rest. About Ethan. About Lucas. About the affair. About Ethan leaving. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she said, "You made your bed." No comfort. No outrage. No rescue. Just a verdict. And the worst part was that she wasn't wrong. I moved in with her in my second trimester because I couldn't afford the apartment alone. Packing up that place felt like participating in my own eviction from the life I should have had. The dishes went into boxes. The towels. The books. The cheap little framed print Ethan once bought at a street fair because I said the colors looked peaceful. I wrapped it in newspaper with shaking hands and hated myself for still wanting to keep anything that had his fingerprint on it. My childhood bedroom was exactly the same. Same beige carpet. Same crooked blind on the window. Same hairline crack in the ceiling I used to stare at when I was a teenager, imagining some all-consuming love that would arrive and prove I was special enough to be ruined for. I had wanted passion so badly. Now I had consequence. My son was born in September. A boy. Healthy. Loud. Wrinkled and red and furious at the indignity of entering the world. They placed him on my chest, and for a moment, everything in me went still. Not healed. Not redeemed. Just still. Because there he was. A real human being. Not a symbol. Not a punishment. Not a lesson. A baby. My baby. And whatever else was true, whatever selfishness, betrayal, delusion, and damage had built the road that led to that hospital room, he had done nothing wrong. I named him Noah. I don't know why that name felt right. Maybe because it sounded like survival. Maybe because I needed something in my life that didn't feel contaminated. For the first 3 months, I stared at his face constantly, searching. I wish I could say I was only doing what new mothers do. Marveling, memorizing, falling in love. I was doing that, but I was also hunting, looking for Ethan in him, hoping for some impossible mercy. A shape of the mouth, the tilt of the chin, anything that would let me live inside uncertainty a little longer. But the more Noah changed, the clearer it became. His eyes were Lucas's, not just the color, the shape, the sharp outer corners, that slight heaviness in the brow. Every week he looked a little more like the man who had disappeared behind a lawyer. Because yes, Lucas knew. I made sure of it. When calls and texts failed, I sent a certified letter. I kept the receipt. I checked the tracking number obsessively. He responded exactly once, and not to me directly. A lawyer mailed over paperwork. Paternity acknowledgement. Child support terms. No note. No apology. No question about the baby's name, health, or due date. No request for a photo. No interest in visitation. Just signatures. Boxes checked. A legal confirmation that he would meet the minimum obligation required by the state, and absolutely nothing more. I held those papers in my hands at my mother's kitchen table while Noah slept in a bassinet beside me, and thought about Ethan so hard it felt like grief had bones. Because the contrast was unbearable. Ethan would have been there. That is not fantasy. That is fact. He would have been in the delivery room, pale and overwhelmed and trying to be brave for me. He would have held my hand through contractions. He would have cut the cord with trembling fingers. He would have cried when Noah cried. He would have learned how to swaddle from videos at 2 a.m. He would have made pasta while the baby slept and taken over when I was too exhausted to stand. He would have kept notes in his phone about feedings and fever temperatures and first smiles because he was the kind of man who remembered everything. He would have been a good father, maybe a great one. And instead, the father my son got was a signature and a monthly payment. That was the moment regret changed shape. Before, it had been about me, my loneliness, my abandonment, my humiliation. After Noah, regret became something else. It became the understanding that I had not only destroyed my own future, I had destroyed a better future for someone who had never asked to be born into the wreckage of my choices. That truth did not arrive all at once, but when it started, it stayed. And once you see that kind of truth clearly, you cannot go back to being the heroine of your own disaster. You become what you are. A woman holding a baby with another man's eyes. A woman living in her childhood bedroom. A woman learning, too late, that chaos does not love you back. Moving back into my mother's house didn't feel like going home. It felt like being filed away. Like I had been reduced to a version of myself that required supervision. The same hallway. The same light switch that flickered if you didn't press it just right. The same kitchen table where I used to do homework. dreaming about a future that felt bigger than this. Now I sat at that table with a baby monitor beside me and a stack of unpaid bills, trying to calculate how my life had folded in on itself so completely. Noah cried a lot in those first weeks. Not excessively, just enough to remind me that time no longer belonged to me. That sleep was now negotiable, that every decision I had made before he existed now had consequences that breathed. I learned how to function in fragments. 20 minutes of sleep, an hour of quiet, a sudden storm of tears, then silence again. And in those quiet moments, the silence I used to fear from Ethan began to change shape. It wasn't just loud anymore. It was instructive. Because the more distance I had from that kitchen, from that Tuesday, from the sound of the door closing behind him, the more I began to understand what he had actually given me. Not punishment, not cruelty, clarity. My friends. I need to talk about my friends because they were part of the story long before they became part of the aftermath. There were 4 of them, women I had known since college. We had built our lives in parallel. Jobs, relationships, routines, shared jokes that only made sense to us. They knew me, or at least I thought they did. 2 of them knew about Lucas. Not everything, but enough. Enough to stop me. Enough to say, this is wrong. They didn't. They said things like, you deserve to feel alive. Ethan is great, but he's kind of predictable. Sometimes you need passion. I remember one of them laughing once, stirring her drink, saying, if you're bored now, imagine 10 years from now. As if boredom was the worst possible outcome. As if stability was something to escape. As if chaos came without cost. They let me use their names as excuses. Alibis. Dinner with Claire. Drinks with Megan. Helping Jess move. They covered for me, and I let them. Because their approval made it easier to ignore the part of me that knew exactly what I was doing. We were all complicit in a lie that felt exciting, right up until it stopped being fun. The 3rd friend didn't know. And the 4th, she suspected. She asked questions I avoided. Looked at me a little too long when my answers didn't line up. I started leaving her out of things. Not consciously, but consistently. Because she had a way of saying the truth without softening it. And the truth was the one thing I couldn't afford. When everything collapsed, when Ethan left, when Lucas vanished, when I was pregnant and alone, that circle broke apart faster than I thought possible. The first one said she needed space from negative energy. The second said she was reevaluating her boundaries. The third stopped answering my calls entirely. And the 4th, the one I had slowly distanced myself from, was the only one who stayed long enough to say what no one else would. I can't believe you did this, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed in a way that felt heavier than anger. Ethan was the best thing that ever happened to you. I didn't argue, because by then I knew she was right. She didn't stay long after that. She had her own life, her own boundaries. But she told me the truth. And sometimes the truth doesn't come wrapped in loyalty. It comes, says what it needs to say, and leaves.
Yes.
Isolation is a strange thing. At first, it feels like something that's happening to you. Like people are abandoning you. Like the world is shrinking unfairly. But eventually, if you're honest, you realize the isolation is just the natural shape of your choices settling around you. I had built a life that depended on deception. So when the deception collapsed, there was nothing underneath it strong enough to hold me up. I tried a few times to find out where Ethan had gone. Not in a dramatic, obsessive way. Nothing like showing up at offices or calling his workplace. He didn't have a workplace anymore anyway. I heard through someone, reluctantly, that he had left his firm, moved somewhere else. No one seemed to know where. Or if they did, they weren't telling me. His number was disconnected. His social media accounts were gone. Not deactivated. Gone. Like he had erased himself from every place I could reach. And at first, that felt like cruelty. Like he had decided I didn't deserve even the smallest window into whether he was okay. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood. He wasn't erasing himself. He was removing me from every possible entry point, every back door, every loophole where I could slip in with apologies and explanations and try to rewrite something that had already ended. He didn't leave space for reconciliation. He didn't leave space for closure. He left nothing. And nothing is absolute. 2 months after everything fell apart, his mother called me. Her name is Gloria Davis. For 4 years, she treated me like I was already part of the family. She invited me to holidays, sent me recipes, texted me on my birthday, the kind of warmth that feels permanent, until it isn't. When I saw her name on my phone, my hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I answered on the 3rd ring. I don't know what I expected. Comfort, maybe. Some kind of shared grief. A conversation about Ethan. What I got instead was something much quieter, much sharper. When Samantha, she said, not unkind, not gentle, just controlled. I have nothing to say to you, she continued. A pause. Except she did. You broke my son. Another pause. Longer this time. Both of my sons, actually. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer. Clearer. But only one of them deserved it. I couldn't speak. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound hollow. Nothing that could stand next to the weight of that sentence and mean anything at all. She hung up. No goodbye. No invitation to respond. And that was the last time I ever heard her voice. Nice. That call stayed with me. Not because it was cruel. Because it was precise. She had said exactly what needed to be said. No more. No less. And just like Ethan's silence, it left no room for interpretation. Therapy came a few weeks later. Not because I had a breakthrough. Not because I suddenly became self-aware. Because my mother insisted. You need to talk to someone, she said, placing a brochure on the table like she was handing me a prescription. I went because I didn't have the energy to refuse. The first session, I didn't say much. The second, I cried. By the third, I started to notice something uncomfortable. The therapist didn't focus on Ethan, or Lucas, or even the pregnancy. She focused on me, on patterns, on the way I described love, on the language I used when I talked about being chosen. She asked questions I didn't like. What does it mean to you when someone is calm? Why does stability feel like rejection? What were you afraid would happen if nothing changed? I didn't have answers. Not real ones. Just instincts. Fear. Conditioning. Things I had never examined because they had always felt like truth. I started to see it slowly. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic moment of clarity. But in pieces. Fragments. The way I needed attention to feel secure. The way I confused intensity with love. The way I interpreted peace as neglect. The way I created problems when none existed, just to feel something. It wasn't flattering. It wasn't redeeming. It was just accurate. And accuracy, I was learning, hurts more than judgment. Ethan's silence started to make sense in a way it hadn't before. Not emotionally. Emotionally, it still felt like being erased. But logically, it was the only response that aligned with who he was. He didn't perform. He didn't escalate. He didn't create scenes. He removed himself. Completely. Because for him, love wasn't something you fought for at any cost. It was something you protected. And once it was broken beyond repair, you let it go. That realization didn't comfort me. It just made the loss clearer, sharper, more deserved. Because he hadn't left impulsively. He hadn't overreacted. He had assessed the situation and made a decision. A clean one. A final one. And I had given him every reason to. Bam. Some nights after Noah fell asleep, I would sit in the dark and think about that kitchen. About the moment his face changed. The exact second when something inside him shut down. I used to replay it looking for a different outcome. Something I could have said. A word I could have taken back. A pause I could have extended. Now I replay it differently. Not to change it, but to understand it. To see the moment not from where I was sitting, but from where he was standing. And when I do that, when I really let myself see it, I don't wonder why he left. I wonder how he managed to leave so quietly. Noah is 5 months old now. He smiles when he sees me. Not because I've earned it. Because that's what babies do. They trust. They reach. They believe you are the center of their world. And every time he looks at me like that, something inside me breaks open in a way that feels both painful and necessary. Because for the first time in my life, I am on the other side of that kind of trust. And I understand exactly how much it costs to break it. Noah is 5 months old now. He's starting to laugh. Not the soft, uncertain sounds from the first few weeks. Real laughter. Sudden, bright, unfiltered. The kind that fills a room so completely, it almost makes you forget everything else. Almost. I live in small moments now. That's the only way I know how to describe it. The stretch of time between feedings. The quiet after he falls asleep. The brief, fragile peace of a morning where nothing goes wrong. My life used to feel like something I was building toward. Now it feels like something I maintain. Carefully. Deliberately. One day at a time. I have a job at a call center. It's not what I imagined for myself, but it pays enough. Enough for diapers. Enough to slowly contribute to the house. Enough to remind me that I am responsible for more than just regret. I go to therapy once a week. My therapist says I'm making progress. I think what she means is I've stopped trying to defend myself. I've stopped looking for ways to soften what I did. I've stopped telling the story like I'm the victim of it. Now I tell it like it actually happened. And the truth, stripped of performance, is much harder to sit with. I used to think about reaching out to Ethan constantly. At first, it was desperation. Then it became something quieter, more controlled. I would draft messages in my head. Long ones, carefully worded, honest, apologetic. I imagined what I would say if he ever gave me the chance. I'm sorry never felt like enough. Because it isn't. There are things in this world that cannot be repaired by language. Some damage is structural. It changes the entire shape of what existed, and no amount of explanation can restore it. Still, I imagined it, late at night, in the space between Noah's breathing and my own thoughts. I imagined knocking on a door somewhere, some city I don't know, and seeing him there. Older maybe, different, but still him, standing in a kitchen, chopping garlic. Because of course he would still do that. And I would say, "You were right to leave." Not as a plea, not as a strategy, just the truth. But I never send anything. I never look him up. I never try to find where he went. Because I understand something now that I didn't understand then. His silence wasn't an opening. It wasn't a pause waiting to be filled. It was a boundary, a complete one. And breaking it, even with an apology, would just be another act of selfishness disguised as sincerity. So I let him have it, the life he built without me, the peace he chose over chaos, the future I removed myself from. Noah grabs my finger when I feed him. His grip is stronger now, intentional. He looks at me like I am everything. And I love him in a way that feels completely different from anything I've ever known. There's no performance in it, no need to be chosen. No fear that it will disappear if I'm not interesting enough or exciting enough or intense enough. It just exists. Steady, quiet, constant. The same way Ethan's love existed. And that realization, that parallel, is one I didn't expect. I used to think love needed to feel like fire, like urgency, like something that could consume you. But the love I feel for my son doesn't consume. It anchors. It holds. It asks for nothing except that I show up. Every day, without fail. The way Ethan did. I think about him differently now. Not as the man who left me, but as the man I failed to understand. The man who offered me something real and was punished for it because I mistook calm for absence, stability for boredom, consistency for indifference. I thought I needed to be fought for, but what I actually needed was to learn how to stay. Some nights I sit in the dark after Noah falls asleep and let myself feel it fully. Not the dramatic version. Not the version that turns pain into something poetic or meaningful. Just the reality. I had something rare, something people spend their entire lives searching for, and I destroyed it. Not because it wasn't enough, but because I didn't know how to recognize enough when I had it. That's the truth. Clean. Uncomfortable. Permanent. I am 29 years old. I live in my mother's house. I have a son who will grow up asking questions I will have to answer carefully. I have a past that doesn't disappear just because I've learned from it. And I have a future that will never include the man who loved me the way I didn't know how to value. Ethan, I don't know where you are. I don't know what your life looks like now. I don't know if you've found someone else. I don't know if you ever think about me. But I know this. You are the best person I have ever known. Not the most exciting. Not the most intense. The best. And I didn't understand what that meant until it was too late. You didn't fight for me, and you were right not to, because I wasn't worth the fight. Not then, and maybe not now. But I am trying to become someone who understands why. Someone who would never confuse chaos with love again. Someone who would recognize steady hands for what they are. Noah stirs in his sleep sometimes. Small sounds, soft movements, and in the quiet that follows, I still hear it. That door, closing, not loud, not violent, just final. And I think that's what will stay with me the longest. Not the words that were never said, but the silence that said everything. I had everything, and I burned it for a feeling. And now I live with what's left. Quiet. Real. Mine.